Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you so much for listening. And on the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs around the internet, including from Zone Coverage, Cover 32, on Cold Omaha. He is useful human Arif Hassan. Arif, how you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
It's been an odd week. It's been really, at this point, I'm just happy to be upright. I was leaving my apartment yesterday morning at about 7:30, and a motorcycle appeared to just be dripping fire in a garage. And I went, well, that's random. Sure, why not? It's not a garage that's attached to my garage, so I didn't think too much of it, but I still called 911 on my way to work, and I was like, hey, you might want to check this out. They're like, oh yeah, we already got a call on it. Great. And then 4 fire trucks pass me on the, that are going the opposite direction toward my place. Oh, okay, that'll be fine. And then I made it home yesterday afternoon, and nearly the entire garage is burnt down. So I'm just oh, and the paper said they killed it in 10 minutes. I'm going, what the hell happened between my call and the 10 minutes it took for the firemen to put the damn thing out? It's I don't understand exactly what just happened here, but the moment I left the parking lot, it must have exploded.
You were the problem. You should have stayed.
Clearly, it's that sort of situation where, you're sitting in a sports bar, okay, if I change my seat, maybe the team will do better. If I would have stuck around for just a little bit longer, everything would have been fine. The guy would have, not burned out 3 cars in the process and all that, so... It is entirely my fault, but for legal reasons, I had nothing to do with it. Just want to be perfectly clear. The word liable is not something I am willing to handle at this point. And with that, welcome to this episode of Norse Code. If you enjoy the show, you can donate to us in one of two different ways. You can go to paypal.me/NorseCode, or you can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and throw Tree Fitty that way. Patreon, of course, is more of a subscriber base, so it's more of a monthly charge. You can give $1. Most people give about Tree Fitty to help keep the lights on and help keep the Loch Ness Monster at bay. We do have one PayPal donation to talk about. It's from frequent question contributor Kenneth Allen, and we're actually going to be reading his little thing at the very end of the show because he has a question. So we will be answering that. It's a fairly important question, but we're going to save that toward the end of the show. He famously had said that he wasn't going to donate to the show until Arif started doing kicker analysis. So I'm glad he changed his mind.
Yes, it's good news because that would have taken too much out of me.
Arif doesn't want to learn a new skill at this point. He's having trouble enough with the cats, so it's just not worth it. So we have a few things to talk about. Obviously, it is the middle of the offseason, and it is just a wonderful desert of news out there, just a veritable nothing of Vikings news, but we are going to try to do the best that we can. So the first thing I want to cover is actually a story that comes to us from Bleeding Green Nation, and this matters to Arif because it turns out that more people in Pennsylvania are now naming their kid Carson. How does that make you feel?
He didn't even win the Super Bowl. He wasn't even there.
That's the argument. Why isn't it Nick? Why
isn't it Nick? Okay, so here's one thing: is that if you're named Carson, everyone's going to know why you're named Carson, right? Everyone, it's Carson Wentz, right? If he gets involved in some sort of, and it seems pretty unlikely given his public character, but still, if he gets involved in some weird sex tracking, cocaine scandal or whatever, your kid's carrying that forever, right? That's it. But if you name your kid Nick and Nick does some stuff, no one's going to care.
No one at all. Well, all those people who were named Michael after Michael Vick didn't have to change their name or anything, so.
Right, exactly. But I mean, there's a lot of kids in Minnesota named Adrian, and they're going to carry it.
for a very, very long time. Their children are going to be quite sad. Almost in tears. I personally can't even imagine naming a kid Carson. And not even just because of Carson Wentz. So I knew a guy, again, for legal reasons, I'm not going to describe his full name, but his name was in fact Carson. And he was a giant, I was going to say something else, but he was just a mess up of like a human being. And a real good buddy of mine was roommates with him accidentally, the way that he tells the story anyway. And
hold on, accident, like random assignment, or
what's
accidental?
It was one of those things that like they worked at the same place and needed, it's like one of those like mutually assured, like, okay, we need some form of like space to continue living, just lost lease or something like that. So they had to find themselves in this, like, they had to do that. And it was accidental, I imagine, because they never worked the same shift. So they just kind of found the situation on themselves.
Okay.
So Carson was sitting at home one day, waiting for his girlfriend to get off work, and he managed to drink most of a handle of Jack Daniels. I think it was Jack or Jim Beam. He was thirsty.
All right.
Carson was thirsty. So Carson does what a normal person would do in this particular situation. He decides, well, it's the middle of the afternoon. It's about 2 o'clock. I should really just go for a drive right now. So he gets in his big white truck and he proceeds to drive out into the country in Grand Forks County. And he's out in the country. He's driving around for a little while, and well, wouldn't you know, he got the urge to start shooting things because he's got a shotgun in the truck because it's North Dakota.
Yeah, it's North Dakota.
It's not hunting season because it's like June, but
it's North Dakota.
It's North Dakota. You got a shotgun back there, sure. So he's wasted on that bottle. Oh, I should also mention he's underage at this point too. He's like 19 or 20 at the time.
That was a given.
Yeah, that was probably a given. And he just opens fire on this little what he thinks is just this like abandoned shack or whatever. So he's just shooting off shotgun shells in middle of nowhere. Turns out that was a trailer that like people lived in.
Oh my God!
And a woman and her son, I believe, were inside of it and like did the like drop to the floor thing, while the way the court transcription described it as like Buckshot was shooting through this double wide, like above them, like a war scene.
Sounds like a country lyric.
Pretty much, yeah, except as far as I know, she never did him wrong or, ran over his dog or anything. So,
she would be singing this one.
Oh,
right?
Well, I suppose so, yeah. So yeah, after hearing that tale, and by God, they threw the book at him.
No kidding.
He did in fact go to jail for many things on that particular account. But yeah, After that, it was a fairly decent story at the time, but yeah, after hearing that, I was like, yeah, I could never imagine a human being naming anyone Carson. And I hadn't even heard the name Carson for years until Carson Wentz appeared on the scene. I was like, really? Because I can't think of the name Carson without, without a woman trying to protect her child from shotgun blasts going through her double wide in the middle of the afternoon on like a Thursday.
Yeah, I think I've got similar Grand Forks memories about people named Hunter or Tanner.
Hunter, Tanner. I was gonna say the last name. The last name Bakken or like Sheldall or something. Just there's too many of them. But anyway,
100% chance that there's someone named Hunter and or Tanner listening to this. Sorry, dude. Maybe not your fault. Maybe it's your fault. I don't know if we know each other, but maybe it's not your fault. These things happen. What
we do know is that for a very small nominal fee, the courthouse is very happy to change it to whatever you'd like. So just don't do it to Carson, and you'll probably be fine. Let's get mad at the NFL 100 rankings for a moment, shall we?
Yeah, sure.
So far, they've released Xavier Rhodes at 55. Some would argue, most would argue, you should argue that it should be a little bit lower rank, but Diggs at 65, Linval Joseph at 83, Kirk Cousins at 94. Interesting to note that Case Keenum is at 51.
Yeah, so one of the things that bothers me about the NFL 100, and it's like less and less true every year. In fact, it's probably significantly less true now. But when it initially came out, one of the things that bothered me was that people would use this in arguments. Like, the players voted on this, and they know better than you. That this player is it's one of the top 100 players in the NFL. How could you say whatever thing you're saying? This is a pretty good argument with like Tebow back in like 2013 or whenever it was. Like if the players voted Tebow like 94 or something that year. And so how can you, a non-player who doesn't know how to play the game, and it's just like the players are clearly all, when they're voting, exhibiting the exact same biases that like a general voting public would. The NFL 100 overrepresents quarterbacks. It overvalues raw statistics. It loves people who like just get the ball, so it undervalues offensive linemen. It undervalues like nose tackles. The fact that Linval's on there at all actually kind of surprises me. And one thing that bothers me is that unlike the Pro Football Focus Top 101, which I always have issues with like every year, but the one thing that it does correctly is it kind of like defines its parameters, right? So we don't know what criteria the player are using to vote, right? Like best career to date, best 2017, best going forward into 2018. Like what are you voting on? And there's never really like a designated criteria. The PFF Top 101, best 2017 performances. That's it. And so that's how you're going to get, you'll miss players, right? Like J.J. Watt wouldn't be on the top 101 because he missed a year due to injury or whatever, right? But, they'll give players like a discount or not even one at all in the top 100 if they didn't play last year. Or if they're pretty confident the player's not going to play next year, they may give a discount or not. We don't know like what they're measuring. And it's just so weird, and it seems like there's this random sample of players. Like they never get like enough players that you can really get a good like census of the league's thoughts on these things. And so the thing that bothers me about the NFL Top 100 is just really that it is a thing and not that where the players are ranked. Like Xavier Rhodes should have a lower number, a higher rank, right? Like maybe, I don't know. Like I don't think he was as good last year as a lot of people were saying. Again, still a top 10 cornerback. But yeah, fine. Linval Joseph, absolutely, he should have been higher. Kirk Cousins, probably higher. Case Keenum, probably lower. All these like. Thielen is probably going to end up being, overrated, and Diggs is underrated, and they should kind of be closer to each other with, personally, I think Diggs ahead of Thielen, but it's kind of irrelevant. They should just be close to each other, whatever the numbers are. I don't really stress out anymore about which players get ranked where, more than I stress out about the fact that it's like a thing that still exists, and they do just such a poor job of like cobbling this list together. And the worst part is, I think, is that if I were the NFL, if I were running NFL.com or NFL Media or something like that, or the NFL Network, I would do this the exact same way as they're doing it right now. That's the if I were in their shoes, I'd be like,
it's, it's incredibly lazy, and people should just sit and complain about it. But I think I kind of want to do it exactly the same way as they always have.
Right, it's the NFL Network. They get access to players, and they need off-season content like everyone else. And what a great way to generate, clicks and views. And what do people love? Lists. People love ranking players. People love players. People love we have exclusive access to players voting. No one else has that. So it's this list that everyone's going to do. Bleach Report's going to do it. SB Nation's going to do it. Pro Football Focus is going to do it. Maybe Sports Illustrated is going to do it. Right. Everyone's going to do it. We're going to do it too because it drives views. It's a moneymaker.
Because it's the off season and
right.
It's a desert of news.
Right, exactly, right. And so, but we have a shtick, right? We get access to the players, so we're going to have the players do it. And yeah, if I were an NFL Network executive, I'd do it exactly that way. And that bothers me the most about it. And I wouldn't give players criteria. Why would I? That doesn't make any sense. Let them vote on how they want to vote. Right?
What does MVP mean to you?
Right, yeah, exactly. It's just, they're always going to put a quarterback at number one. Yeah, fine. Get quarterback sell. Like, they're going to overrepresent quarterbacks. Dang. Like, as an NFL Network executive, I'd be like, can we do it even more? Can we get more quarterbacks?
Where can we put Blake Bortles on this list? We have all these facts.
Right, to be like, who voted for Donald Penn? Who cares? Let's get him out of here. Like,
Christian Hackenberg is topical again. Can we sneak him in somewhere?
Right. And you get interviews with players, and the players always have to compliment whoever they're talking about at the moment, which, like, that's the only downside. If I'm an NFL Network executive, I would absolutely encourage trash talk, is the one thing. Like, where did you rank him? Dog, he shouldn't even be on the list. Like, that would be great. That's the only way I would improve it, is if in the player interviews you had the players just absolutely dog someone for being on the list at all or being voted too high or whatever. That would be, I guess, my only improvement if I were an NFL Network executive. But I'm not. I'm a podcaster and a blogger. And so from that perspective, this list is all bullshit. It shouldn't exist.
Like, you'd think that having like the contrarian view on that and not have it be a celebration. At the moment, it's more of like a celebration of like their accomplishment for the year. BS. Next year, let's just make it all about what? Diggs? Don't you see how he pushes off on every play and just like, have like Antonio Brown sit there and go, he couldn't tie my shoes.
Yeah, right. Exactly. No, it'd be perfect. Or like, cornerbacks or whatever. Right.
Well, cornerbacks would be great.
Yeah. Holy crap.
Cornerbacks and wide receivers just dogging on each other for the entire 2 hours.
Like, can you imagine like Odell Beckham and Richard Sherman just going at like whoever's ranked where?
What? Refresh my memory. Who's got the chain? Crabtree.
Yeah, Michael Crabtree at Keep Talib. Oh,
yeah.
My God. We need that.
That is what this league needs.
we should just call it the Haters 100.
Yes. Hey, and if you want to have like the regular 100, fine. You should also air the Haters 100.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, this is perfect. You want to drive up viewership during the off season that all you're doing is just showing old drafts at this point. Like, this is prime original content for NFL Network. Licensed to print money.
Yeah, so you have the top 100. Great, fine. And then, like, next week or whatever, just have all the players who disagree with literally anybody on the list. It only has to be one. But go through the top 100 with people just hating on where that player is ranked. Like, I would watch way more of that.
Like, here's where having a personality will really shine. Let's just give like a hot mic to Richard Sherman.
Right, and it's not like you're gonna like bruise a ton of egos except for the other players, but like no one at the NFL is gonna be, because it's like, I mean, we didn't put this. The players voted, so you're just really crapping on other players. Oh, that's perfect. Mm-hmm. And then like 3 years down the line, someone's gonna sign with a team, and he's gonna be on the same team with someone who just like shit talked him for like 10 minutes. Oh my God!
Be like, awkward.
You're like, hey, what do you think about, now you've been, shit-talking Odell. He just got traded to the Seahawks or whatever. What do you think, Richard Sherman, or, whatever, right? And they'd be like, well, he's good now. He was bad then, but he's been cool.
Now that he's paid by the same guy I am, I'm legally obligated to think that he's a better player than he used to be. And he works, he probably works even better in our system. Let's just be honest here.
Yeah, right. Honestly, I didn't know what I was talking. It was the system kept him. That's really what the issue was, right? Yeah, that'd be perfect.
Between that and a TV show about like NFL players believing in conspiracies or like trying to sell you on ideas, that would be fantastic.
Well, I mean, that one you could do kind of like a co-show with like NBA TV, right? Mm-hmm. You'd have Kyrie Irving and Will Hayes sit down and tell you about flat Earth and mermaids and dinosaurs not existing. Oh, that'd be perfect.
The dinosaurs existing thing might actually be more than just like that. I have this theory that would end up being more of a thing. Flat Earth
Right.
is still funny to listen to, but
Well, yeah. But yeah, I mean, you could do all that. You could like when Jared Goff found out on Hard Knocks where the sun rose. Like you could have like moments like that. Like, oh, I didn't know this like basic fact that you're supposed to like. That's perfect.
the Hater 100 would be perfect for Hard Knocks too. Like this is just more stuff to feed in. Like it'll help Hard Knocks. It'll help your like during the lulls of. It'll help during the lulls of NFL broadcasts where you're like, there's nothing more to talk about. Like during like a pre-season, like during like a pre-show thing, you're like, well, earlier this year when we were doing the Hater 100, Odell Beckham Jr. said this about Xavier Rhodes, and just like, you have stuff to cut to.
Yeah. Oh, that's you know what I just realized? Because the NBA does everything right, they're just going to do this now. They're going to do an NBA top 30 or whatever, and then they're going to have the Haters top 30, and that's going to be delicious.
Going to end up having to add
better.
that to Sling, aren't I?
Yeah.
That's too bad.
And they should sell a separate league pass for just that show.
Just air it on. It's basically pay-per-view at that point. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God.
That would be sweet. That is what this league needs. Sadly, I think you're right. The NBA is going to find a way to steal this away.
Yeah. Adam Silver, Roger Goodell, my DMs are open. I'll give you my address. You can give me the check. It'll be great.
Just don't name anybody Carson. So the next thing we wanted to talk about is something. Obviously, training camp is going to be coming up, and we have a number of unsigned free agents, a number of rookies that have joined the team, and we wanted to take a look at potential bottom of the roster people to add on, or kind of potential Mr. Mankato's, or although I suppose now it's going to be Mr. Egan, which sounds a bit like a substitute teacher.
Do you think they should do you think that even though it they're not in Mankato, do you think they should keep Mr. Mankato? Should they call it something else? Because I agree, Mr. Egan is just an awful name.
Oh, it totally sounds like the substitute teacher that you come in. Hi,
right? Yeah, exactly.
Hello, kids. My name is Mr. Egan. I'm here to teach. I'm here to teach. What chapter are we on right now in your French book? Ugh.
Right. Yeah.
Fine.
Well, here's some handouts.
Yeah, Mr. Egan is 2 days away from retirement. He's a former teacher. He's just he's doing this because he lost all his money in a Ponzi scheme. Boy, I don't know. Mr. Mankato had such a wonderful ring to it and all, but
yeah, no, and obviously 1500 ESPN, who I think they're the ones that do it. Maybe the Star Trek. I think it's 1500. They're the ones so they'll ultimately end up making the final decision. Sometimes I talk about it as if the Vikings do this.
Yeah,
which would also be funny.
I was actually under that belief, or I was actually under that the first year that we were doing Norse Code. I actually was of the for some reason I thought that was actually something that they did until I found some article about I think it was 1500. It was talking about they were the ones doing it. I was like, oh, okay. I thought this was some unofficial award or something, because then Thielen won it. It's
right. Well, so that's the other potential name for the award is the Adam Thielen Memorial Award or something like that.
Well, you can't call it Memorial.
Sounds weird. Yeah, because he's not dead. But what are you gonna the Adam Thielen Award sounds weird. You gotta add something to it.
I think you can call it. I think you can name it. I think you can name it after Thielen after he's out of the league.
But then you need a name for the next 10 years, right? It's gonna be what you need an interim name.
Yeah, you can't. I just don't think you can call it Mankato. I think the in between ends up having to be. It ends up having to be either Egan or some weird spin-off of Norse or Viking thing. Mr. Norse or something stupid like that.
Oh man, 1500 needs to hire a brand consultant just to figure out this name thing.
So you're saying your DMs are open?
Yeah, my DMs are open.
So what are we looking at for the formerly Mr. Mankato kind of bottom of the roster situation? What do you think as far as those trying to climb up and kind of shine a bit?
Sure, yeah. So you've got a couple of options. The two that stand out to me are Corey Robertson, a receiver from Southern Miss, who is the highest undrafted free agent signing bonus that the Vikings have ever given out in their team history, which means that they value him a lot. And so I think that's a pretty good sign that you're going to get something there, and he's got a good chance of making the roster. I think the bottom of the receiver depth chart is not super enticing because you're competing with like Stacey Coley and stuff like that. But it is worth noting that the Vikings also give a disproportionate shot to tryouts, and disproportionate doesn't mean like unfair, right? It's in fact remarkably meritocratic. But if you take a look at like how many undrafted free agents the Vikings sign every year and bring to camp versus how many tryouts earn an undrafted free agency contract, and like separate them into two groups, and then take a look at how often they make the roster. Tryouts make the roster just like way like 4 times as often as UDFAs do, as regular UDFAs do, because the people who like make it through the tryout process have already gone through like this whole thing. They had to stand out in like a span of like 2.5 practices over a guy that they had already committed a contract to. So these are people like Adam Thielen, of course. Marcus Sherrills is a good example. CJ Ham from this year is a decent example. There's at least one more, I think, on the roster right now. But yeah, the tryouts are worth it. And Chad Beebe is that guy because he didn't get an undrafted free agency contract, I think. I guess I'll have to double check this. But he got a tryout thing. And the extra note here is that because Mr. Mankato is a Buzz Award, like it needs to be like very media friendly. And like, what's better than like it's the son of Don Beebe, like one of the fastest men to ever play in the NFL, and former. And I guess he was a Packer, and Buffalo Bill, right? I think he's a Buffalo Bill, yeah. But like Midwestern guy, comes from the MAC, right? The MAC conference. White, which I think that helps. It's not like only white people have won Mr. Mankato, but it helps.
Do we like have verification that not only white guys have won it?
Yeah, I think J-Ron, won it. So.
Well, yeah, I suppose.
Yeah, but it's like a guy that the media falls in love with. Like J-Ron was huge and obvious, right? It's very easy to like see him do stuff in camp because he's like a 6'4" safety. And so, it's easy to see him, right? It has to be like obvious. I think one of the Burtons, Stephen Burton, I think, not Brandon. Yeah, Stephen Burton won it too. But like Adam Thielen, right, is a great example. And maybe it could be Colby Gossett. There's they put out a list of who's eligible every year, which I think is amazing that they even do this. They put out a list of who's eligible every year. But my guess is, so you've got all the day 3 guys, right? So Colby Gossett. Devontae Downs, who I don't think will win it because I think he's just going to start the year off on PUP, which means he's not going to have any buzz in camp. Ade Aruna, he's also a great interview. He's got a pretty decent shot. Really explosive, super media friendly, and that helps a lot. Hercules Mataafa, I think, is also a really good dark horse. He's an undrafted free agent. Played defensive tackle. Did a spot at linebacker in rookie mini camps, currently listed at defensive end. His name is Hercules. That kind of stands out. So, he's an interesting guy. But, Garrett Dooley or Brett Taylor, their potentials. Trey Matthews, Holton Hill. Holton Hill is actually a pretty reasonable he's got a pretty reasonable shot of doing it. Tyler Conklin, Peter Buchholz, the Holy Cross quarterback. Rock Thomas, the Jacksonville State running back. Chris Gonzalez, Jake Weineke is a decent shot. People have been talking about him for a while. So, Jeff Badett, insanely fast, receiver that could potentially take over a return spot. Those are the guys that are basically eligible. But I think you've got, the guys that I like are for this are Corey Robertson, Chad Beebe, Hercules Mataafa. And I think those are maybe my 3 favorites. Colby Gossett, I think, is much more likely to make the roster than any of them, but I think he's just like not as interesting a Mr. Mankato. And so you're just like not going to get it,
Mm-hmm. I think having the odd name certainly helps. Like just something that kind of catches or that just like rolls off the tongue. Mataafa. Ooh.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Oh, Michael Boone is a guy that people, he's a scat back, and they always tend to get a bunch of media love. the pass catching running back that's small, like your Jordan Todmans, your Jerick McKinnons.
I was going to say, didn't
Bradley
Jerick
Randalls.
McKinnon win one year, or did we just spend the entire time talking about Jerick McKinnon?
No, we just spent the entire time talking about him.
Oh, okay, that's what it was.
He was ineligible because he's a 3rd round pick.
Oh, that's what it was.
Yeah. But yeah, your pass catching running backs are super popular. So that's something to keep track of too.
So let's talk a little bit about, I was actually talking to somebody who was doing some fantasy work, and he was just kind of going through some mock drafts right now, just trying to like get some of the rust off. And boy, it is miserable to try to do anything in the way of fantasy right now. There are just so many unsigned like wide receiver and like names out there.
Yeah, I mean, like, so I'm in a dynasty draft right now, and it's this super deep. It's insane, right? It's like you've got, I think, there's 25 veteran picks and then 5 rookie picks. It's the worst. And then you get like 3 practice squads that you can only use for rookies. So your roster size is I think it's 28, and you have to cut 2 people before the season starts. So it's crazy deep right now. And so people have drafted DeMarco Murray and Des Bryant, and it's a fairly safe assumption that they'll end up landing on teams, right? But still, you're just like, what's the plan here, bub?
Yeah.
Like, and you have to choose between like, should I get Jakeem Grant, a guy who's only a kick returner or punt returner for the Miami Dolphins, or Des Bryant, which in most years would be an insane question, but like one of them is on a team, so. Yeah, it's crazy, but I think the way, so the things I found out that I really like about fantasy. So obviously I used to be in a ton of fantasy leagues. At one point I was in 23 different fantasy leagues one year, and I've definitely figured out what I like in fantasy scoring and the way I like my fantasy league structured. And so so instead of talking about like sleepers or stuff, because I mean, there's like fantasy experts you could just listen to for that. I'm going to talk about like my ideal setup for fantasy, which is instead of points per reception, I like points per receiving first down. Cause that way your 3rd and 18 2-yard reception that gets you like 3 points is like not important in the game, and it's not important in fantasy. And like your Jarvis Landrys and Danny Woodheads aren't like insanely overpowered. They have to actually do stuff on the field, but it still rewards pass catching running backs. It still rewards higher reception guys, and it performs the functions of PPR in that it flattens out the landscape and makes running backs less important, so you don't have to draft them right away. In I think a pretty good way. So I like points per receiving first down. If not, otherwise, half point PPR is fine by me. But the things I really like, I like super flex, which I think is the new wave, like where you can have a flex spot that you can play any positions. You can play a quarterback in that flex spot. You can play a kicker in that flex spot. Any positional player you can play in the super flex. I really think that's what we're doing, because quarterbacks just kind of, I mean, you're not drafting quarterbacks in the first round of fantasy. Maybe you're drafting Aaron Rodgers at the bottom of the first round or something, or Cam Newton in some years when he's coming off like an MVP season. But like quarterbacks, the sweet spot's like the 5th, 6th round. And that's like weird to me. I don't like that. I like leagues where you have to like, you've got like a double bye week because you planned poorly, and you're like, oh my God, I have to decide between Tyrod Taylor and Nick Foles. What do I do? Like, that's great, because now you can't just pick up a quarterback off the waiver wire and you've only lost like 2 points of production. I love Superflex. I love quarterback leagues. And so one of the things about fantasy is that people become very familiar with the players that are on their team, and just in general, they're very people can talk to you all day about receivers, right? Like people will tell you, hey, Jordy Nelson's declined, right? They'll talk to you all day about, like a 3rd string running back, right? Because, it's fantasy relevant. But I like IDP a lot, because then you become really familiar with the people who aren't like the top level safeties or the top level linebackers or the top level cornerbacks. And it makes you familiar with guys that are really important for their team, but are like not the top player, right? And I just think that's fun. And you end up with like cheat codes like Antoine Winfield or I guess Barry Church for a while was a cheat code because he was like bad at playing a safety but good at getting points because he got a bunch of tackles. But for the most part, like the people that I know that appreciate Rashad Jones the most as Miami safety are people who play IDP fantasy. He's a really good freak, and Malcolm Jenkins too, actually, the Eagle safety. They're both really freaking good safeties, and they're more undercovered in the media than Harrison Smith. But they're also fantasy studs, and so people become familiar with them. So I really like IDP for that reason. The Dynasty League I'm in right now is not doing IDP this year. Apparently, we're going to do it next year. I don't know how that's going to work out. But one of the things that we're doing this year that I really love is punt return yards and kick return yards count too. And that expands your roster of players. So someone just drafted Cordero Patterson. They don't expect him to catch anything, but he's going to be like a valuable at the back end of the roster. I think that's cool. That's what I like about fantasy. James, thoughts?
I was actually curious of exactly how the Superflex ended up working.
Well, I've only done Superflex a couple of times, and this Dynasty right now is a Superflex. But really, it just pushes quarterbacks up. I mean, I had the first overall pick, and I drafted Odell Beckham because in a Dynasty league, it doesn't make any sense to draft a running back. But I ended up picking quarterbacks in like round 2 and 3, which I never do in regular fantasy, or I would in regular Dynasty, just because you can get just insane value in the 5th and 6th rounds for quarterbacks. I remember I got Tony Romo's and Phillip Rivers like every year. I got Peyton Manning the year that he signed with the Broncos in like the 5th round, which I won that year because duh. But I think I had like everybody on that Broncos offense on like one of my fantasy squads too. But I like that a lot more. It's just so weird to me that the guys that produce the most points produce such a small variance in points that you can wait until the 5th or 6th round on them. And I also like it when you have bigger penalties for interceptions, because I used to be able to put Eli Manning on my roster every year when interceptions only cost you 1 point instead of 2. And Carson Palmer was kind of the same way, another Carson. I mean, that was great, but now I like the heavier penalties for interceptions because, like, Blake Bortles will actually hurt you now,
as opposed to just hurting you for the past several years. Like now he actually hurts you for reals in fantasy.
Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly. Instead of hurting you from the perspective of like watching him and clawing your eyes out, now he hurts you in your pocketbook if you've got money on the game, which is legal now.
We'll have to talk about that at some point in the near future, the potential legality of football betting and all that. But yeah, just looking at fantasy, the more that like it gets kind of in depth, because it would be interesting to throw out more penalties as far as like interceptions go. Like your quarterback is a major points creator, so why shouldn't it swing both ways?
Yeah, and like and not saying that fantasy should like match real life, otherwise PPR wouldn't make any sense. But in real life, and by real life I mean a game in the sport of football, interceptions statistically, historically, hurt your teams twice as much as touchdowns help, right? So in equivalent yards, a touchdown is worth about 20 yards, right? A little more, a little less. I think 18 is how one site calculated it. 22 is how another site, but 20 yards, essentially. Interceptions are roughly 45 yards of penalty. That's not how it works in fantasy at all. It's 4 points for a touchdown, unless you're in a touchdown-heavy league, in which case it's 6. And it's like 1 or 2 points for interceptions. And so you kind of just don't have to care about the picks all that much, unless you started Nathan Peterman. Like, you're usually in a pretty good spot if your quarterback throws a pick or two. Whereas in like football, like that pick or two, I guess unless you're Case Keenum, is really going to matter. So that's what I feel like you should have bigger penalties for negative plays. There's this one fantasy league I was in for like 1 year. It got insanely complicated. I have no idea how they scored it, but negative rushing yards were worth twice the negative as positive rushing yards were worth. And that was super fun. Like, because then it was like not a great idea to like pick Danny Woodhead early or Tariq Cohen early. You know, those small pass catching running backs that get boosted by PPR. You know, the guys that are like boom or bust, right? Leonard Fournette would have been awful in this league. That's cool because in I guess real life, you know, 2 negative yards is like awful, whereas 2 positive yards is almost okay. So yeah, I think that would be cool. I just think that increasing the negative penalties in fantasy would just be a good idea.
Speaking of which, are you still down for the negative 25 points for the extra point?
Oh yeah, I'll win it, obviously. Till I die.
I explained that to a guy who is just starting up at the college, and I mentioned he mentioned he was real big into fantasy, and I proceeded to explain the rule, and God, it never gets old, the horrified look on someone's face when you mention the negative 25 point rule, and how Dusty rode to the championship on the back of so many kickers missing extra points.
Oh, speaking of, I think you should get as many negative points from a missed field goal as you were about to make positively from a field goal, because that's worse field position for the other team.
It could be. Would that include, well, at that point, though, you'd be arguing whether or not, like, this applies across the board, because sometimes you end up just kicking that as, like, a fake, almost as, like, a makeshift punt sort of thing. Like, you're kicking it from 60 yards out, knowing for a fact your kicker doesn't have the leg for it.
Yeah, you just got to deal with it then. From a fantasy perspective. Like, I didn't know that he was going to end of the half, a 68-yard attempt. Jeez, I didn't think that was going to happen.
Well, I mean, it was in Denver, so I mean, there was a chance.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but that's the kind of fantasy.
Gruden knew that this kicker in 2013 had a great leg, and he just wanted to give it a shot.
Yeah, right. That's the kind of like fantasy like BS story I want people to be able to tell, be forced to tell.
So like my story of Brett Favre's dad dying and me losing a perfect season in fantasy, like that sort of disturbingness.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Something that stays with you for a long, long time. Well, let's head over to the mailbag. We've got a couple of great questions here. Josh Swedlin asks, are the players on the Vikings roster this season who you can see being a future cap casualty in order to re-sign the big three? If so, which players? Basically, who's expendable at this point?
So presumably the big three are Hunter, Diggs, and Barr, right? Like no one's including Waynes.
You would have to assume.
So who's expendable for those purposes? Any veteran backup, which I mean, they already got rid of Emmanuel Lamur, so there's not a ton of veteran backups to get rid of at this point. But, they won't have to take on Joe Berger's contract next year. They're probably not going to have Brian Robinson or Terrence Newman next year. So they're all gone. Marcus Sherrills is kind of the next question, which he could be gone this year, right? If Mike Hughes takes the spot as a punt returner, which it's going to make the rest of the special teams like much more difficult because he's so valuable from all these other perspectives. But if he's not returning punts, they're probably just not going to keep him. But yeah, all of those veteran backups, you're going to have to ask questions about, Anthony Harris and Jaron Kearse if they, want to get new contracts. The veterans minimum to sign them is just, that much more than it is to, and they might even sign for more than veterans minimum. I thought Anthony Harris played, well enough to earn like a contract. Maybe not to start, but to like compete to start. Right. Then, rookie contracts are just like cheaper. Right. And so you're going to have to carve out kind of a lot of those spaces. Not literally everybody. Like you're probably going to keep someone like Anthony Harris or, players like Kendall Wright will always be there. Michael Floyd last year. But for the most part, those guys that have been on the team for a while that are veterans, that are backups, you might just have to get rid of because they just keep on adding up. But I think if Hughes works out, they're really going to consider kind of letting Waynes, kind of pursue what he wants to pursue in free agency. And that might be like the sacrifice that you have to make. But for the most part, like your Latavius Murray's gone.
Yeah. Next question is from Raul, who said, I just had a crazy idea. One missing piece to the Vikings offense is the Joker tight end. with Kendall Wright replacing Jarius Wright on the depth chart, could we potentially use Laquan Treadwell in that Joker role? He is thin, but he may have the length and blocking ability. Can Laquan be our Trey Burton? Is this idea crazy, or crazy like a fox crazy?
I mean, what have you got to lose? I guess.
At this point, it's either that or we just put him on the offensive line and see what he's got. Like, he's going to catch the same number of balls on the offensive line, so.
Look, Aviante Collins is small too. Just go for it.
Let's give it a shot.
I mean, I don't hate it, honestly. Like, I know Don from Ohio has been joking about it literally since Laquan has been drafted. But I mean, I do think that Treadwell is like overrated as a blocker. Like, I think he's not nearly as good of a blocker as, especially like during the draft. They're like, oh, he's like the best blocking receiver I've ever seen, which like, yeah, maybe, but I wouldn't talk about it like that. Like, oh, he's probably the best blocking receiver I've ever seen. Like, who cares? And I do actually care about blocking for receivers, but he's not like the Gronkowski of receivers, right? Like, this is what I said when he was coming out, is that a lot of people kind of think of him as that, where he can block really well and he's this like phenomenal receiver. And like, even if he was as good of a receiver as his draft slot lived up to, he like has a ton of whiffs too. It's just that when he does block, he blocks with like just this insane, like game changing, probably inducing penalty attitude that like just takes people out of their cleats. But he also just like misses a lot more than someone with his reputation should. Still, it's not a bad idea. He's not going to lose a ton of speed if he adds weight. So sure. He only has to add like 20 more pounds, I think. And then, he's like kind of Jordan Reed-ish, right? I'm
trying to imagine him like throwing an elbow and trying to like burst open on a crossing route.
I mean, you're lining him up against safeties instead of cornerbacks now. That's nothing but good news, right?
It's just the inside. It's just like the middle of him that'll hurt, just not the hands.
Yeah, right, exactly. I guess you have to figure out like if his frame is like enough to take on that extra weight and play that role, because if he's got like thinner hips and thinner knees, which I know is like the joke about Teddy, but we're talking about adding 20 pounds and like your frame is your frame. If he's got like thinner hips than is suitable, then maybe it's a bad idea. But it's worth trying to see if you can get something out of this first round pick.
Yeah, maybe. Kyle Slaby asks, does Arif ever re-listen to his podcast appearances to take notes and improve? I won't ask James because it's clear he doesn't.
Out of left field, man.
That's mean. That's
a drive-by. Jeez.
I actually do. What's sick is I actually do re-listen to the show every once in a while because I'm like trying to make notes about things to be adding to the Christmas episode. So you can go to hell, Kyle Slaby.
Yeah, I think James listens to the show like 100 times more than I do.
Like, you're not even paying attention now. Teddy.
What was that?
Exactly. Also from Kyle, Teddy, from many accounts, is doing fairly well at Jets OTAs. How do they F it up? Is he inexplicably designated third quarterback all year, never seeing the field? Is he flung out there with poor game plans, Norv style, or is he cut before training camp and not even given another gig?
Yeah, we got like a couple other Teddy questions too. Like, hey, they traded Christian Hackenberg. Does this improve Teddy's chances? Which I'll answer that before I answer Kyle's question. No, he was always going to beat Christian Hackenberg in camp. Just not relevant at all.
The guy from Craft Services has a better throwing motion than Christian Hackenberg.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Like, come on. Like, Hackenberg was hitting reporters multiple years, multiple times at OTAs and minicamp and training, like, and it wasn't out of maliciousness either, which that I would understand, but like, because the Jets beat sometimes can be pretty grating. But no, he was just, he just beamed people. Like, whoops, didn't mean for that to go there.
The way that people were talking about his preseason last year in training camp, it was akin to like a war crime, like just how awful he was and how it's obvious that he was this bad because he still hasn't taken an NFL snap how many years into his quote-unquote career.
Yeah, like, if people get like mad about like Tebow, which they still do, maybe this is maybe the one case where I'm like, well, okay. we're like, you know, people like, Tebow's blackballed from the league because he's like too Christian for this like anti-Christian league or whatever. You know, normally I'm just like, you got spots on like 4 teams and you got to start for a year, so probably not.
And he beat the Steelers in a playoff game. I think that's about as overachieving as you were going to get. Yeah,
right. I mean, he's just like bad. Just accept it. He's bad. But I mean, like the Christian Hackenberg argument, that would at least make me pause. I'd be like, well, I mean, the Jets probably should. He's probably not hitting reporters in camp. That's an upgrade, like, you know? So, yeah, that's maybe the one example where I'd be like, you know, maybe Tebow should stop playing baseball and pick up that Jets uniform again. Like,
do you take Christian Hackenberg just normally versus Geno Smith with his jaw wired shut?
Oh, Geno every time. And that's knowing that, like, if Geno gets sacked, which he's not very good at avoiding, he could have just the wires just cutting up his insides. And be like, yeah, well, you know, even hurt you is clearly better.
You's just spitting blood there. Yeah, that's tarnishing.
Well, I mean, you don't need teeth to throw, man. Get back out there, Geno.
I'd say rub some dirt on it, but Alec.
Let's talk about Teddy for a second.
I suppose we should answer the question.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, Teddy looks good, I guess. Fine. It's like one day at OTAs. He hasn't collapsed, so that's a good sign. That's basically what people are saying, right? They're like, well, he's moving. He looks like he
hasn't turned into
athletic,
dust. No,
whatever. Right? Yeah. It's big. Like, you know, no one snapped their fingers. Spoilers. But you know, it's whatever. So how do they screw this up? I don't know that they can, right? If he sits on the bench all year, if he makes the team and then sits on the bench all year, are they screwing it up? I mean, they got a guy that they signed to be the starter, Josh McCown. They got like a first-round draft pick that they evidently love. It's not really a reason to. I mean, I do think that Teddy has like a higher ceiling than Josh McCown, but you know, it's understandable that they would play Josh McCown instead because like he's played a lot without collapsing. Like that's a huge positive that he's not like dead. So you know he's got that going for him. I guess it's screwing it up if like Teddy is genuinely healthy and he's better than McCown and Darnold and they don't play him. But like it's also like very understandable, right? So that doesn't bother me. The real question is like if they want to go 2 quarterbacks to 3. If they go 2 quarterbacks, then you've got like this real question, right? Like does Teddy have a legitimate chance to compete with McCown? That would be a really fascinating question. Then, you know, they could screw it up, right, by cutting the wrong quarterback. But, you know, if they decide to go 3 quarterbacks, which I bet they do just because they have a rookie, then, you know, he's already made the team. Hooray. I suppose they could, like, expose him to too much danger. But at that point, I mean...
He's already signed on with the Jets.
You're right, exactly. He's signed on with the Jets. It's like part of being a quarterback. It's definitely part of being a quarterback for the Jets.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, sorry, Teddy. But I hope you succeed. I want you to, like, start all 16 games, beat the Patriots for the division title, make the playoffs, lose to the Vikings in the Super Bowl. I want all of that for you.
Yeah. I don't think that's too much to ask, quite frankly.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Alex Paulson asks, could you see somebody with an extreme amount of leverage, like Aaron Rodgers, for example, using said leverage to get a contract that's based on a percentage of the cap each year? If that were to happen, what kind of ramifications could/would it have on future contracts and CBA discussions?
I don't think so. I think I've asked this question to Jason at Over the Cap, which is like now kind of the more premier NFL contract salary cap website. Jason, I think his last name is Fitzgerald, is like kind of an expert on that. So I asked him about that, and I don't think there's anything in the CBA that prevents you from like demanding a percentage of the cap. But it would be difficult, I think, to work out, especially with like incentives and like likely to be incentives versus unlikely to be earned incentives. And It would make it difficult for teams to kind of plan a budget going forward. I think you just kind of have to like anticipate what it's going to be and then have your agent figure out what those numbers are and then work with those. So no, I just don't see it happening. And maybe it's actually not legal at all to the CBA. I think that would be like the most ideal situation for most like high value free agents. But I just don't think it's ever going to happen, especially because like it's very easy to be like negotiated off of it. Like if you're in a negotiation and you're like, hey, I want 9% of the cap, whatever it's calculated to be, because I'm like this fantastic like defensive end free agent or whatever. And the team just says, well, here's what we think 9% is going to be for like the next 4 years. You can check it against, our projections or whatever. We'll just give you this dollar amount. You could definitely just announce, like if you're an agent, like having your client announce that they got like a $40 million contract or a $140 million contract is way better than saying, yeah, we got 9% of the cap, whatever that is. So I don't see it happening, but I think it would be ideal and it would give us a better understanding of what these deals mean, right? Because quarterbacks are always signing the highest deal in the history of the NFL. And it's like not like they're not like.
Well, that's the thing is that it's sort of like talking to somebody about like American standard versus metric. Be like, there's like a fair amount that people just aren't as familiar with as far as like the inner workings of, or like what number they're starting from as far as cap are concerned. So while it may drive people to like learn a little bit more about the cap, it wouldn't mean anything to them. You're just telling them kilometers without saying like miles with it. You're not actually telling them the like amount of like the actual distance being traveled there. So yeah, it would be interesting to do, but as far as like a PR standpoint, like people wouldn't know what the hell you were talking about unless like you truly dug in, or you're just trying to provide more work for the bloggers out there to actually like provide the breakdowns. Because I know you love doing cap breakdowns.
It's the best.
It is the thing you enjoy the most.
I actually did really enjoy writing up the Jared Allen cap breakdown when he signed with Chicago, because the deal was so awful.
It was absurd. Like we knew that he had like a year or two left in the tank, but he was going to be too expensive. Like, no, you go do your thing. And then Chicago backs up a Brinks truck to him, and it's like, wow, dude, that's an intense deal you just got there.
Yeah, well, I mean, he could have signed for a better deal, honestly, with the Broncos, because they were offering him or Ware $100 million, and Ware said yes first. So
I like to think that he was out in the middle of the desert, like burying part of his salary or whatever.
Right. So that one was actually fun to break down because it looked like it was an awful deal on Chicago's side, but it actually was an awful deal on Allen's side because of all of the details, right? Because you knew the Raiders were offering him more money and the Broncos were offering him more money. And like the better he did, the less likely he was going to get a second year of the contract, because there's a provision in the contract, or there was a provision in the contract that if you got double-digit sacks, the deal would automatically void, because then he would use those double-digit numbers to pursue a better deal in free agency later, assuming that it would like help and increase his market and stuff like that. But he's just coming off of a double-digit sack season, and
that's a hell of a like an escalator / de-escalator there.
Right? Yeah, it was an awful deal for him mostly. And because the contract automatically voided, the team didn't want to guarantee, so he didn't get any guaranteed money. It was just terrible. So that one was a fun one to write about. But most of the time, I'm just like, yeah, he signed the biggest deal a linebacker ever got in the history of the NFL. Wow. Also, the salary cap's bigger than it ever has been in the history of the NFL. Now, if we account for that, he's only the 5th highest signed linebacker. Like,
there you go.
That's the story.
Next question is from Minnesota North Star, who asks, what's taking so long for Mike Hughes to sign when all the other rookies signed quickly? Why do rookies even wait when it's pretty much set what they will get?
Because there's still one thing to negotiate, and the Vikings have actually been pretty stringent upon this. This is like way back when they drafted Matt Khalil. This is actually one of the points of contention that drove it all the way into training camp.
It's going to be parking spotted in Egan, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, you got it.
Knew it.
It's offset language. I guess I don't there's no report of what it is, but like I'm 95% confident it's offset language. So what the thing is, so every first round pick gets a guaranteed deal. We know what the numbers look like. There's not much to quibble over. That amount is slotted, and they're guaranteed that money, right? If they get cut, that's the money they get. The difference is if they get picked up by another team for either the same contract once they go through waivers, or for a new contract if they don't go through waivers and the team kind of negotiates a separate contract individually, the difference in how much I should say this, the amount of money that the team would pay the cut player, that the new team pays the cut player, would not have to be paid by the Vikings. So it's much easier if I just give an example. Let's say, Matt, a player's name I chose at random, and it's not because I just used that name. Let's say Matt Matson signs a deal with the Vikings for like $10 million, right? It's fully guaranteed. He gets cut because he sucks or whatever, right? Then the Raiders decide to sign him. So he goes through waivers. The Raiders decide to sign him for $5 million. The Vikings then therefore owe him $5 million, and the Raiders owe him $5 million. So the total amount of money he gets is $10 million. That's with no offsets language. With offsets language, if Matt Matson gets cut on a $10 million guaranteed contract and he gets signed by the Raiders for $5 million, the Vikings will still owe him $10 million, and the Raiders give him $5 million. So he will have made $15 million that year. So that's what offsets language does to a contract. It's about whether or not, when another team picks up the tab, whether or not the original team has to pick up that amount of money, right? And first round picks, that's usually the only thing they're negotiating over. So I would imagine that's what's happening with the Mike Hughes contract. I can't imagine he has a ton of leverage. He was a 30th overall pick, not a top 5 pick. The Vikings, I think, ended up caving to Matt Khalil, but I don't think they've given offsets language to any other first-round pick that they've drafted. And Mike Hughes has even less leverage because, they kind of don't need him this year. That's the one advantage the Vikings not picking for need, is that they can just be like, look, we got 6 corners, so this is your NFL career. It's just offsets, man. You're going to get $10 million kind of no matter what. What you're really asking is if another $3 million, essentially, that would only happen if you just didn't work out with us. So he has definitely very little leverage. So I would imagine that's it. I am not too worried about it.
While we're talking about rookies and draft picks and everything, did you see the ad that LSU put out about their quarterbacks that have come out of their college?
We've had 7 drafted quarterbacks, and it's this picture of Zach Mettenberger and Danny Etling and
Jamarcus Russell is front and center.
Oh God.
Matt Flynn.
One of those guys I hadn't even heard of.
Matt Flynn has a gigantic head in it too. It's great.
Well, I mean, honestly,
the dude has played for half the team in the league.
Yeah, right. He did the best out of all those LSU quarterbacks. I'm trying to remember who's the Browns guy.
I actually have the picture up right now, and that would be Josh Booty.
Yeah, that I remember that because I was like, oh, he reminds me of. Oh wait, no, he's not John David Booty.
No.
Oh well.
he just happens to have a similar name. But yeah, Matt Flynn and Jamarcus Russell. Jamarcus Russell being front and center there. Obviously, he was a number 1 pick, but really, that's the one you're touting. That's the one that you're truly advertising at this point.
Yeah, well, I was talking to, so as this was happening, I was talking to somebody who does recruiting for colleges. So I won't say which college team he recruits for, but. I was talking to him about just some other thing. I think it was about sports science or whatever. And this tweet hit my feed. And so I sent it to him. I'm like, what the hell is this? And he responds with, the recruiting graphics war is the most absurd thing that's happened to this industry. And I'm like, what? Because if you just say hey, we've gotten 7 quarterbacks drafted, and that's your tweet, that's fine. A bunch of people in the replies will be like, wait, you mean Zach Mettenberger and Danny Etling and Josh Booty and Matt Flynn and Jamarcus, that's who you mean? That's fine, right? If people in the comments are like, well, that's kind of a weird thing to brag about these guys. But if you're putting them in a graphic, that's way weirder.
I like the idea that they had to pay for rights to pictures of Jamarcus Russell for this ad.
I actually, I'm not sure. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if they all the Photoshops are very fly by night and they're not paying like photo rights and stuff like that. And the best part is they've got this picture of Danny Etling in a number 16 Patriots jersey. And the only person who've ever worn number 16 in a modern Patriots jersey is Matt Castle, which is just so they had to Photoshop his face because he's wearing number 2, I think, for the Patriots. So they had to Photoshop his face into a Matt Castle jersey, which is like fine, but like why not a Jimmy Garoppolo jersey? Like why?
Yeah,
like,
at this
to go all the way back to Matt, and it was a while ago.
Is it at least the same race, or is this a situation of like Bradford onto Teddy?
Well, no, that's always going to be the worst. No, but I mean, like, it's not like you can be like, the Patriots, they famously don't have white quarterbacks. Like, they had some pretty white quarterbacks, right? Like, why'd you go back to 2008? It's so weird.
We wanted an action shot. We didn't want a scene. We didn't want a picture of him like on the sidelines holding a clipboard or a Surface or whatever. We wanted to make sure this was still relevant.
He's got more action. He did play the entire 2008 season. There's that. But he could have gotten a preseason of Jimmy Garoppolo, right? Like, and regular season. Jimmy played the regular season. I mean, I guess maybe
it would be a crime to Photoshop somebody out.
I was just about to say that.
Handsome.
Maybe it's just unethical because it's no, that's fair. Or maybe he's too swarthy, right? He's got the Mediterranean look about him, like.
That's clearly what made them choose someone else.
Right.
Nick Olson has a cool little thing here. He says, Brett Coleman released a video today on Howie Roseman's formula for the Eagles Super Bowl roster, and then includes the link that we'll include in the show notes. What would you say the Rick Spielman formula looks like? What would be some of your own GM/roster building tenets?
So of all the Brett Coleman videos I thought I'd get tweeted at me, I thought it was going to be the Dalvin Cook one, which people have been talking. We'll put that in the show notes too. But he's talking about
everyone seems to be sending that one around.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and it's praising Dalvin Cook with a lot of detail, right? Like, why wouldn't you want to send it around? Coleman was saying he's kind of all in on Dalvin Cook being one of the top producers, rushing producers in the NFL this year. Which fine, great. We'll put that in the show notes. Definitely worth watching. It's a very good video. I always recommend Brett Coleman videos. So this one is about how Howie Roseman built a winner. And in the video, it's got like 5 winners or 5 rules for a Howie Roseman roster. Some of the rules are kind of the opposite of what the Vikings do. Some of them are consistent with what the Vikings do, and some of them are probably rules that the Vikings follow. There's some pretty interesting stuff in there, stuff that's kind of unique just to the Eagles, right? Like the way that they treat quarterbacks like currency. The one thing in that video, the problem in that video is that, especially with the news coming out today, is that he talks about, I shouldn't say the one problem, the biggest problem. He talks about how highly the Eagles value quarterbacks. And initially you're just like, well, I mean, everyone values quarterbacks highly. That's kind of a whatever. But he's making the point that they value quarterbacks way more than most other teams, especially backup quarterbacks and quarterbacks that you can essentially use as assets and trades. And so they moved many more assets than a lot of teams would to move up to the second pick for Carson Wentz. They also moved a ton of assets to get Sam Bradford and they paid a lot for Chase Daniel and they paid a lot for Nick Foles. Like they clearly value that. They tend to pay the backup quarterback in Philadelphia way more than in other places. And obviously that like panned out. They got a Super Bowl ring out of it because they got the quarterback that they wanted. And he was talking about, and they've like traded quarterbacks a bunch of times for extra picks. I mean, obviously we all know about the Sam Bradford one, but they've traded Nick Foles for like a bunch of picks, right? And they ended up signing him back too, right? And he thought that they're going to trade Nick Foles again. And it's kind of interesting or awkward because the news came out today that they were offered the 35th pick for Nick Foles, and they turned it down. And it's either they value him that much or they're just like confident that a quarterback is going to get injured before the season and they can trade him for a first instead.
I was going to say, or the third option being they're just not as convinced in Carson Wentz's like health, more as like an insurance policy.
Yeah, or hey, maybe Nick Foles is better than Carson Wentz. I don't know.
It's entirely possible. Yeah,
one of them has a ring, one of them doesn't.
You're not saying. Well, he still has a ring, but like he didn't play. He didn't play in the game to win. He wasn't a part of the Philly special.
Yeah, he wasn't part of the Philly special. All those tattoos, all those Philly special tattoos. Mm-hmm. He's not. Anyway, he's not one of the X's. He's not one of the boxes.
No.
He's not there, man.
He wasn't. Where was he? He wasn't there. He wasn't on the field.
Absent father.
This is going to lead to drug problems and all sorts of kids named Carson being so sad and upset at their parents, their eagle-loving parents.
Should have named him Nick. I'm just saying.
If you're going to have one takeaway from this episode, it's that you should have named your kid Nick and not Carson.
I feel bad for our former intern, Carson.
He was born way after Carson Wentz became a thing. Do not try to. He may have been named after Johnny Carson. I don't know. All I know is that he is not affected at all by the by this vitriol. And if you are listening,
sorry, QB.
Yeah. Moving on. We're just gonna keep on this, aren't we? This is the real Hater 100.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Let's
he wanted to know what I think the Vikings kind of rules for building the roster are. So
right.
One of the things that pops up in the video is how much the Eagles value the offensive line and defensive line, and what that value means in terms of their investments. And this is kind of where the Vikings differ. So obviously they care a lot about the defensive line, but the investments that they make in the defensive line are significantly different. The same is true with the offensive line. And I think here you can make one of the distinctions that one of those rules is to find cliffs of value and exploit them. And I think they've kind of figured out that one portion of those rules is just like not working for them. But those cliffs of values means that they think that there's a lot of really great value in 7th round linebackers. They love 7th round linebackers. They get a ton of 7th round linebackers. They think there's a lot of value in 5th and 6th round guards. They love 5th and 6th round guards. They get them like every year. They've increased the value essentially of what they're going to pay for interior offensive linemen, with the picks of, Pat Elflein, and I guess Willie Beavers, and DJ Clemmings doesn't count because they wanted him to play tackle. But for the most part, tons of 5th and 6th round picks of interior offensive linemen. Now I think they probably wouldn't have had the board fallen a little bit differently. I think they would have broken that rule, but that definitely used to be kind of a part of this value cliff rule. And one thing that you can see this for, and it's kind of part of rule 2 though, one thing you can see this for is the way that they treat defensive linemen and especially edge rushers, where they try to get them in the 3rd or 4th round, maybe the 5th or 6th round, but they've definitely got like a formula, right? They need to have a really great 3-cone or a really great broad jump, or preferably, like in the case of like Brian Robinson or Danielle Hunter, both. And so they get these super athletes on the edge, and they can trust their talented defensive line coach, whether that's Carl Dunbar from way back or Andre Patterson now, they can trust their defensive line coach to just coach up those guys to be really good. And that's worked out really well for them, which means that there are places where they do invest a lot more resources into. In Philly, they do not invest that many resources in the cornerback position. With Zimmer and this current iteration of Spielman's front office, they invest a ton into the cornerback position. 1st round pick Xavier Rhodes, 1st round pick Trey Waynes, 1st round pick Mike Hughes, 2nd round pick Mackenzie Alexander. Free agency signing former 1st round pick Terrence Newman. I guess you could say 1st round pick Harrison Smith, but he was picked before Spielman, I think, was like the GM, whereas Xavier Rhodes is picked after that, but before Mike Zimmer arrived. There's a lot of investment in the 1st round pick corners, and I think this kind of speaks to something that if you listen to the podcast, the PFF Forecast, which is so a lot of people think of Pro Football Focus as like analytics, and it's really not. But there are people at Pro Football Focus that do analytics, and Eric Eager, friend of the show, is one of them. And he and George, whose last name I don't remember and probably cannot pronounce, sorry, George, do a podcast called the PFF Forecast, where they talk a lot about the analytical insights that they've put out, and they've put forward, and the models that they've come up with. They've published, some open papers for people to review and stuff like that. One of the things that they found out that the Vikings have kind of already acted in accordance with is that cornerbacks are actually a lot more valuable than people have been giving them credit for, and more valuable, in fact, than edge rushers. The Vikings haven't really taken edge rushers in the first or second round. They've taken them a bunch in the third round, like Scott Crichton, Danielle Hunter, Everson Griffin, Brian Robinson in the fourth round, Stephen Weatherly in the sixth, and Deshaun Bowers undrafted, Ade Aruna in the sixth. They take middle and late round edge rushers, and they take first round and second round cornerbacks, and that kind of bears out that they're just a more valuable player position. And there's actually an argument that Eric got into with Brian Burke, who used to run this excellent blog, Advanced Football Analytics, and is now a big part of ESPN's analytics group and their stats and info team, and was a big part of developing Total QBR. He got into a fight actually with Eric about the value of the cornerback versus the value of the edge rusher. And Pro Football Focus has a bunch of data, whereas Brian has a really good theoretical model that would work if it were not for the fact that we've got like data now, right? So his argument was edge rushers can cut quarterbacks off at the point of decision, whereas cornerbacks can only take away one of the branches of a decision tree, right? You take away one receiver, the quarterback goes to the second receiver, right? If you're a shutdown cornerback, whereas an edge rusher, you can just sack the quarterback and that's the end of the play. And so cornerbacks have to be 5 times better at their job, right? Because you've got 5 eligible receivers than edge rushers to be valuable. And Eric was saying, actually, the evidence suggests that that's the impact that they have, that they're 5 times better. And so the fact that the Vikings do invest a lot more in the cornerback position kind of bears out analytically. And so you could say that that's one of the rules, that they think that coverage is king. A lot of times teams will talk about building from the trenches, and the Vikings do care about it, obviously. And then they'll build inside out. The Vikings also talk about it a lot. They talk about building from the trenches. They talk about the defensive line and the defensive line rotation and how really good pass rush can help your coverage. But honestly, the way the Vikings are building, the way they're focusing their coaching, and the way that they build the roster, the way that they always add more cornerbacks every year, it's kind of the other way, right? Where and these kind of work together, but where coverage helps your pass rush. And so that's kind of what they're doing, is that they've got this coverage is king thing. So that's probably 1 to 3 of the rules. I don't know if I've separated them out really as cleanly as Coleman did on his video. But then another rule is that athletes matter. That it's better to have athletic guys than to have non-athletic guys, and they put their money where their mouth is, and they invest a lot in better than average athletes for their position at nearly every position. They've got the fastest linebacking core in the NFL, I think. Maybe the Seahawks have a faster one, but for the most part, they've got one of the fastest linebacking cores in the NFL. They've got one of the fastest cornerback cores, the historically fast position, one of the fastest cornerback cores in the NFL. They've got they invested a lot previously into super athletes at running back. Now you've got Dalvin Cook, who didn't test extraordinarily well athletically, but still, they got Mike Boone, and they always bring these incredible athletes in training camp. People like Jarrell Presley, another Spark superstar. They tend to just get better athletes at their position than most teams do. I guess you could say there's an exception at receiver, although their undrafted free agents tend to be more athletic. You could say there's an exception in some other spots, but for the most part, athletes matter, and they focus a lot more on athletes than I think a lot of other teams. I'm sure it could come up with more rules, but Coleman was researching this video for a couple months, and I'm answering this question just kind of right now. So
this is just spitballing at this point.
Yeah, but yeah, those are the rules. Target value cliffs, coverage is king, and athletes matter. And they care a lot about quarterbacks too. So let's throw that one in there. Quarterbacks are worth a lot.
And it works best if you can acquire 3 of them that will all, be traded away at the end of the year.
Would have been nice if it was a trade. That's the thing that stings the most, right? They should have been traded, but you can't. They got compensatory picks. It's close.
Works. Ben Glazman asks, industry talk has circled around talk that Captain Kirk, unlike his TV counterpart, isn't good under pressure. What is your take? Did his inconsistencies come from bad tendencies or from O-line play / injury?
I will say this. His numbers under pressure surprised me because they weren't as bad as I thought they would be based off of the discussion everyone was having about how poor he is under pressure. That said, I do think that he's a guy that when the rhythm of the game isn't working for him, suffers a lot more than most quarterbacks in similar situations. Like a lot of people talk about Alex Smith as like a system passer who needs like rhythm, but no, he's actually a pretty good improviser. Kirk Cousins, I think, just doesn't work as well outside of the structure of the play when it breaks down. And so that's something to consider, and that's a problem. But I think the problem has been exaggerated with regards to him. And I haven't done the 5,000 word breakdown that I'm going to end up doing by the time the season starts on him. And I may change my mind on that by the time I watch every snap again for like the third time. But for now, I think it's kind of exaggerated, but it's definitely there that versus other quarterbacks, his play under pressure falls off a little bit more dramatically.
I was going to ask if you've seen Black Panther more times, or if you've seen if you've seen Kirk Cousins under pressure more times this summer.
Probably Kirk Cousins. Now, if you ask Yinka, who's watched Black Panther, I think 10 times, I think we get a different answer.
I was amazed, actually. I caught Black Panther like two or 3 days before it like went to DVD. Like I caught it at a cheap theater. I was like, okay, great. At this point, I'll probably see Infinity War by December. I know me. I know how this is going to work. And then like 3 days later, I actually caught Infinity War, and I was like, I don't understand what it's like to be caught up. I don't get it, and I don't like being caught up anymore. Damn it.
You don't like talking about stuff other people talk about.
No, I'm much more of the slow and steady situation. Mosav asks, is the slot corner spot going to doom us like it did in 2013? Because Terrence Newman can't patch the spot forever. I don't think he's patching the spot now.
Did it doom us in 2013, or was it like not having a quarterback? I gotta say, man. I mean, they were like, they went 5-10, right? Like, it's not like...
Well, that was more of a fates conspiring against us as opposed to one glaring hole.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I mean... Because, I mean, like, Josh Freeman played that year. Like, I don't know if that was the biggest issue. But, to answer the question, I think more specifically, right? Because who did they have at slot in 2013? Sean Prater? I don't think they had anybody. They must have played Marcus Sherrills at some point. Josh Robinson.
There we go. I was going to say that had to be Josh Robinson.
Yeah. Then he went on IR. Again, better than he got credit for. But
we weren't, but we were still cheering the day he left. Let's be honest.
You were.
Oh, is that
I'm alone on this hill.
Oh, I'm sorry. We just happened to have lots and lots of tape of you complaining about Josh Robinson and then being happy he was gone.
I mean, at first
you didn't order a cake, but I'm not saying that like you didn't celebrate a little bit internally.
Here's the deal with Josh Robinson.
You did order a cake. I knew it.
No. Also, did you see that cake?
Yes.
Okay. Fantastic. We'll put that in the show notes.
The spell check cake. The you should Google it cake.
I'm going to put that in the show notes.
The clearly you didn't go to college cake.
Well, okay, so I don't think the kid really did go to college, though, either. Like, so obviously the employees didn't. But, like, he went to, like, a home school. Like, come on. Does that even count? Sorry, I probably offended a bunch of homeschoolers. Whatever, we're putting in the show notes. It's just, I've written it down in the show notes as a sheet cake. And I'll link it, and you're just going to have to find out what we're talking about. Anyway, here's the thing about Josh Robinson. From the moment he was drafted up until the year before he was cut, he was unequivocally bad. That's it. That's all. He was bad. There's no like nuance to that. He's actually pretty good on special teams. So he's actually really, really good on special teams, but like not good enough to like make up for all the other stuff. And he wasn't a good kick returner, even though he ran like a 4.21 or something. Well, not a 4.21, but like a super fast 40, right? And so, you know, he couldn't really compete at the kick return spot, which kind of sucked. But before the Chicago game, he had the best yards per like coverage snap in the NFL or something along those lines. He was having a phenomenal season. And then he got like destroyed by Alshon Jeffrey and Brandon Marshall back when they both played for Chicago. And he didn't look the same. And then he just like looked bad for most of the year after that, which is like halfway into the season. It was like a reverse Trey Waynes, right? Where so Trey Waynes was having like an equally awful 2017 as he was like the first 2 years of his career. And then he just turned it around. He just had this, he went to London, found some, I don't know, like illegal stem cell therapy or something. I don't know. And
he got the Kobe treatment.
Out. Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. And he just balled out, and he was one of the best cornerbacks the second half of 2018 or 2017. It's like the reverse that with Josh Robinson, where he like figured out that like 6'5" people exist, like people who are 6'5", they exist, and that like shook him to the core, and he just didn't recover. Right? I always thought he should have been converted to safety, and guess what? Josh Robinson's still in the league. A, B, he's a safety now. I was always right.
God.
The lesson here is listen to me only when I say 2 years later to listen to me. What was the question? What were we talking about? Oh, slot cornerback position. I don't think it'll do us this year because of my cues. I'm writing a piece right now about Mackenzie Alexander, whether or not he's salvageable. I don't know yet. I just don't know the answer to this question yet. I'm going to, go into the footage, review the tape, see if there's any errors to correct, Leslie Frazier style, dig into some of the numbers, and figure out, like, is he kind of on a Trey Waynes trajectory? Like, Waynes kind of figured it out. Will Mackenzie Alexander figure it out? Is this a reliable model for us to just think that cornerbacks are just going to suck for 2 years? Because it almost kind of happened to Xavier Rhodes too, right? Where like his first year, he was just like kind of bad, like not as bad as Waynes or Alexander, but like not good. Or like, is this kind of like, is this it? Right. But he's got a lot of potential to improve. You're right that Terrence Newman can't, hold it together like, bubble gum on a aircraft carrier or whatever. That's like an analogy someone's used before. I'm just going to say that. But I think with grabbing Mike Hughes, you can play in the slot and on the outside. And I think with having Terrence Newman for a year, you've given yourself enough latitude this year, at least, for the Vikings to be fine at the slot cornerback position. And I think kind of long term, the Vikings will be continuously attacking that position because there's just like not a ton of holes on the roster, right? They're going to find a 3 technique to replace Sheldon Richardson and or sign him to a long-term deal with the magic cap wizardry that you've got with Rob Brzezinski. And they're going to attack the slot cornerback position, and they're going to get a guard. Probably 2. So like those are the kind of the 4 or 5 things they're going to do for like the next 2 years. But I'm not worried about it this year. I don't think it's going to be, I shouldn't say I'm not worried about it. I'm reasonably confident about it. And I think it's something that they're going to consistently try to improve on. So I don't think it's going to doom the Vikings this year or in future years. If the Vikings, and I don't think it like was the biggest reason the Vikings lost that Eagles game, right? Like it was just like a ton of things went bad at once. Like who's going to predict that Harrison Smith was going to have actually the worst game of his entire NFL career in the NFC Championship game? Like that happened, right? Case Keenum had one of his worst games. Like it wasn't as bad as the Steelers game or anything like that. And, if you were going to assign blame for who lost the game, maybe he's second or third or maybe even just fourth on the list. But the offensive line had a terrible game. So it's not like the fact that Mackenzie Alexander got targeted 3 times near the end of the game for like 3 conversions is the reason that the Vikings lost that game. So, there's like a lot of things, but I don't think the slot cornerback position is going to doom them.
Probably not anyway. Yeah, if we start breaking down the NFC Championship game again, I think we're going to need drinks.
Right.
Next question is from OPM, who asks, there's been talk about moving Remmers to right guard. Doesn't appear to me like he fits the mold of a mobile guard needed for zone scheme. He seems more like a mauler. What do you think?
Yeah, I disagree. I think he's better at tackle. I think he knows how to use his length a lot more. I think that the fact that he's not as quick, I think, with his hands, and he's not like Phil Lodeholt or anything like that, but the fact that he's like not as quick with his hands as a lot of guards are means that he's kind of better suited at tackle. And I think he knows how to take advantage of the extra space between a defensive end and an offensive tackle. And statistically, he's been better at tackle, I think, in terms of like pressures given up and stuff like that, than he has been at guard. But I don't think that would be a reason. I don't think the scheme fit thing is a reason, because doing a lot of the same stuff schematically as a guard, as a tackle, in terms of your footwork and in terms of, if you're going to reach block, if you're going to down block, if you're going to maybe not pin and pull, right? Like if you're going to pull on a zone block, then it's going to be a guard and not a tackle, but you still have to move a lot, right? And the Vikings have pulled their tackles on. They've played unbalanced a lot. I don't think scheme fit's a big issue with Remmers at guard at all.
Next question is going to be from Connor, who asks, would it really be a Vikings offseason if we didn't try and convince at least one veteran to come out of retirement in order to solidify the roster?
It's a requirement. But the thing is, they got two this time. Right? Yeah. They got Newman and Robinson.
So I suppose so. If that's the case, then we don't even need to talk about Incognito or Berger.
Yeah, it's a double dose of the magic, because it worked twice.
We have so many rings. So many.
Does it count if Incognito talked himself out of retirement? Like that's different, right? They didn't like fly down to Mississippi to talk to him. They're like, you can be as racist as you want. Come up here. No, it was like,
oddly enough, Childress did drive him to the airport, though. Yeah. But that's actually due to his job as a limo driver now. So
which I guess I should talk about that real quick, because some people want to sign Incognito and some people don't. I think he absolutely would upgrade the Vikings guard position. Not remotely a question. He would be a huge upgrade. Last year, he was one of the better guards in the NFL. And he's scheme versatile. He can move really well. He's a really good mauler, right? He did really well when Buffalo was running a power running scheme 2015, 2016, but he also did extremely well when they were emphasizing the zone stuff that they did last year. And he's done zone stuff in Miami. He's worked with Tony Sperano before. There's a ton of reasons that you could argue that they should get, Incognito, in part because they just don't have a right guard. They just don't have one. It's like, is it Danny? It's like three backups. That's who it is.
That's all right. Right guard's not really important. That's kind of like saying that it's okay that the gig got canceled in Boston. Boston's not really much of a college town.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's like you're deciding between like the Vincent Adultman of right guards, where you're trying to figure out like the three guards and stack them on top of each other, or you've got Richie Incognito, right? So yeah, there's a ton of, but I don't want to sign him. He's an asshole. That's it. Like,
as far as business is concerned, this is good business.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But there's like some points where I'm just like, yeah, trade Adrian. He's not good, but if he was, trade him. Richie Incognito, just get rid of him. Don't want him. Chris Cook, cut him. Like, it's like one of those things.
Yeah.
He would absolutely help, and I don't want him in the locker room. So, and you could argue that like he would disrupt the locker room presence, and that would be bad. Like, but even if like that weren't true, I still don't want him. Right? Like,
I bet he doesn't even like donuts on Saturdays.
Right? Like that's just unconscionable. That's maybe the worst part about him, is that he probably doesn't like the donuts.
He just has the look of somebody who would be mean to dogs. Like, I just don't. No.
I don't know. He kind of looks like a dog. I don't know. And then not even as an insult. Like,
not even as an insult. He just kind of looks like a dog.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things about Incognito. I don't think he's got an asshole face, is the thing. Like, when he smiles,
there's something about Sean Payton that we're not talking about here, but yeah.
Well, I mean, you couldn't print his face on a sheet cake, I can tell you that.
Not at that bakery, anyway.
But don't sign Richie Incognito, but he would help the team.
Yeah. Bill Bodke asks, the Vikings have a strong roster, which means some of their day 3 selections we pushed onto the practice squad. To avoid poaching by other teams, I could see the Vikings seeking out developmental or injured players like Aruna or Devontae Downs, whose value this year is limited. Could this explain why the Vikings' day 3 picks are not always the best player available, or am I trying to see a pattern where it does not exist?
I don't think there is a pattern here with regards to that. I do think there's a pattern of finding, developmental or injured guys in the later rounds more often than other teams do, right? Because a lot of teams will go after less athletic, more technically developed guys. Your Michael Campanaros is probably a really good example. Or your Trent Taylors or whatever. But the Vikings tend to get Michael Motti, for example, or Devontae Downs. They were considering drafting Anthony Harris in the 7th and they didn't, but they got him as an undrafted free agent, that sort of stuff. And I think it's more just because they think the value is there. I don't think it has anything to do with being able to game the PUP system. I think it's just more. So they care a lot about this injury thing, and it may reduce the impact of the injury problem if you can PUP them or put them on the practice squad without having to worry about them getting poached right away. But I don't think they pick a guy because he's injured, if that makes sense. I think they just evaluate the injury impact on the market value of a player differently because, they just do, right? They've got a lot of trust in their training staff and whatnot. And so they see it as a way to get high risk, high reward players that can be really good if they're fully healed and, they don't have this ceiling that they have to worry about. So I don't think that's it. But it does help, right? That they can do that, right? They do kind of a lot more often than I think people realize. They did it to Zach Line, where they were just like, oh yeah, he's on IR. He had a thing that he got in college that he never healed. So yeah, whoops, he's you can't get him, teams. It happens, but I don't think the Vikings are targeting it because they can protect those players once they go through the round of cuts.
Next question is going to be Alex Goebel, who asks, if you somehow knew with absolute certainty that the Vikings would never, ever, if they're never, ever going to be winning a Super Bowl, would your interest in the team wane as a fan? Would Arif turn coat and begin covering the Seahawks instead? I feel like you already do.
My days of covering the Seahawks are somewhat behind me.
Somewhat?
Well, I mean, field goals gives me a call. I might listen, but but yeah, if I had traveled to the future, found out, and then traveled back, or if I had an understanding that the future was fixed and you couldn't change it, and then I saw into the future,
you had the reality gem,
right? Yeah, or the time stone, yeah. Right? My interest as a fan would probably decrease, but because and a lot of people actually responded to this question with, "No, absolutely not," or "I already know they'll never win a Super Bowl. They're the Vikings." But you don't believe that, right? You don't actually believe that there's a 0% chance that the Vikings win the Super Bowl in the next 50 years.
Exactly.
You got some belief, right?
Even Minnesota Wild fans who know that they're not going to make it out of the first round of the playoffs again, they still watch with a hope that it will. Right,
because there's uncertainty. There's some level of uncertainty, right? And maybe that level of uncertainty is a little bit smaller, right? And you're just but there's the hope, right? And that's kind of what you're banking on. If you knew with absolute certainty and you believed it, in your heart, if you travel to the future and you just got confirmation, I traveled 1,000 years in the future. The NFL was canceled, 300 years after we traveled into the future, and the Vikings never won a single Super Bowl, right? In the 400-year run that the NFL had.
But it turns out concussions were a big deal.
Yeah, right. And now they play with robots, and there are no Vikings. It's just an all-robot league. They're all on Mars. Whatever, right?
Even the robots made in Minnesota are not winning titles.
Right, yeah. It's not happening. and you travel back and you find that, yeah, it would be very difficult to cover the team. But I still would, right? Like, I'd still be like, well, this is why they suck.
I think it would still be okay to cover the team. I don't know if it would be easy enough to be like a fan of the team.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah. It would suck so hard to be a fan of the team.
You would, you'd constantly be labeled as that like downer, but like you tend to be, quite frankly.
Yeah, except I'd actually be negative. Like,
yeah.
So the thing about me being like negative all the time is like that it's not, true, right? Like, I put out, like, one time I actually just counted it, right? I was like, how many articles are positive, how many are neutral, how many are negative? And obviously I'm like doing this with like a bias, like I'm trying to prove somebody wrong. So, maybe there's some like difference in like the coverage, but like I publish way more positive articles than I do negative ones, but people like glom onto the negative ones, right? Like, I published this article about, like, hey, Case Keenum is going to be a liability heading into the playoffs, right? And people are like, you're always so negative. And it's like, wait, did you read this article about how Trey Waynes is good now? Did nobody read this article? I wrote that Trey Waynes is good now. No one's given me, like, points for being positive, right? Like, I'm not going to say credit for recognizing something that, like, I don't need credit for pointing out that he's good. But I probably deserve points for being positive about a thing. Like, I didn't even say, this is a spike, it's going to be unsustainable, he's going to fall off. I never said that in the article. I was like, oh, wow, he's good now. That's great. Like, and I could have. There was an argument there that it's like, oh, we've only had like 3 games of data where he's been good, right? I was like, no, he's like recognizing this thing better. He's got his hands on the receivers much more often. Throughout the route, he's he's playing with better technique. No, I was just like, he's better now, right? I wrote that the Vikings have like the best third down defense in the history of third down defense, right? Because we've got data going all the way back down to 2021. They've got the best third down conversion rate like ever. No one's like, Arif, you're just so positive all the time. I publish way more positive articles than I do negative ones. But
I think if you put like 4 positive articles like out in a row, people are going to ask like, who's your doctor and like what antidepressant are you taking?
Right, yeah. But I think it's just one of those things.
I think it's PED related.
Yeah, right, yeah. You're taking performance enhancing drugs for journalism. You're too positive now. Right? This is not what I signed up for.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, if I knew that the Vikings were like never going to win the Super Bowl the next 300 years, and then the NFL is going to be done, right? Like if I knew that was the trajectory, yeah, it would just be all negative articles. Just be like, yeah, man, I hope him the best, which means signing with another friggin' team.
No, I just envision you like year after year going, here were all the articles where I was right.
Yeah, right. I'd probably make a lot of money gambling though, right?
Well, of course, yeah.
Like every year the Vikings make the playoffs, I put a bunch of money on them losing. Like that's it.
Be like, they're the number 1 seed. There's no way they're going to lose to the wild card. No.
I'm from the future.
We will find a way to make this work. Next question is from Don from Ohio, who asks, if I could do the Thanos snap and eliminate one of the following, who would it be? Carson Wentz, Sean Payton, or Aaron Rodgers? First off, the question is kind of, I would say, impossible, just because of the Thanos half rule.
Yeah, it's 3 people, man.
Yeah, you gave us 3 people and told us to eliminate 1. Thanos would be very disappointed in you. Personally, I would go Sean Payton as dust, and if we could just take like half of Aaron Rodgers away, so like he just ages like exponentially right now to like a 45-year-old quarterback, that I'd be fine with that.
When you said half, I wasn't expecting half his lifespan. I was expecting like he just loses his legs.
Like he just loses half of his abilities. Like you have like athleticism and then you have like the mind. If we can take the athleticism away, then he has the same problem that like all older quarterbacks have. Like I know I can play, but like every time I get hit, I see stars. So like
late stage Peyton Manning.
Exactly. If we can just turn him into the last year of Peyton Manning, or every one of the last 5 years of Eli Manning. I would also be okay with this. I just want to put that out there.
Oh man! Hey, so Carson Wentz, Aaron Rodgers, or Sean Payton? Yeah, I think the only moral choice is Sean Payton.
Yeah, that one just has to go.
Yeah. Sorry, not that sorry.
Not sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Murder's bad. I hate this question. I would never kill anybody. But if I had to choose...
For legal reasons.
Right, yeah. Legally, I am going to have to say that murder is bad, and I do not condone it. Please do not murder people. But, yeah, if I had to choose, it'd be Sean Payton, right? The more I learn about Aaron... This is like the Nick Swartzen problem. Sorry, James. But, like...
We as a fan base can still do better than Nick Swartzen.
Right, yeah, I agree. But the point he's making about how, like, he didn't want to know Aaron Rodgers because the more he'd learn about him, the more he'd, like, be, like, friends with him, and he'd hate that. The more I learn about Aaron Rodgers, the more I kind of like him. And so, like, I hate him, but, like, not as much as I did. And that's not true for Sean Payton. The more I learn about him, the more I hate him. So, bye. Carson Wentz, he's just like this immensely good dude. Every story I hear about him, he's like even better. Like he's like building homes in Haiti now, and I'm just like, how do I hate this guy? Jesus, he's so good. I hate it. It's like now I can't like be snarky about JJ Watt anymore because like he's been injured for like 3 consecutive years, and now he's giving like all his money to Houston Relief, and he's paying for the funerals of the Santa Fe kids and stuff like that. And it's like, wow, you're actually that good, huh? Oh, okay.
Like, wow, you're actually using your money for super good things. God damn it.
Right. It's like,
why do you have to be good?
I can't even make it my shtick to hate you. Like that's like,
no.
Which it's like becoming that thing with Carson Wentz, where it's like,
oh, it's beyond that with Carson Wentz.
Well, I mean,
this is brand. This is like,
well, it's obviously brand. I'm not saying it's not my shtick. It absolutely is, but it's becoming more difficult, is what I'm saying. It's becoming difficult for it to be my shtick because like he's like a good dude. Like it's just like, yeah, he's no longer the kid who tweets out, "I'm thinking about cutting my dick off." Like that's the problem. Like the time he got stuck in the bathroom was the highlight of his NFL career to me, because everything else has been downhill. Like, come on, man. And it's not like I can make fun of him for being injured. Like that's not how my brand works. That's poor form.
No, that's just that's just running up the score at that point.
Right. Yeah. So whatever. Man, so I have to. Sorry, not even sorry. Bye, Peyton.
No, you don't need to apologize for turning him into dust or anything. Although I will say, partially agree on the Aaron Rodgers thing, just because I can sympathize with having a family member that you absolutely do not care about and wouldn't cross the street to like urinate on them if they were on fire. Like,
oh yeah, 100% on board with that. By the way, Aaron Rodgers, I totally understand.
I
explain no further. Yeah, I get it.
Totally understand that. Doesn't mean we don't, make fun of it on Norse Code often, but still.
Oh, it's hilarious.
Yeah. You don't get along with your family. Final question is from our donor this week, from Kenneth Allen, who says, "I'm going to be staying in the Twin Cities for 6 weeks. I haven't lived in Minneapolis for 6 years, so I'm pretty out of touch with the current scene. I was hoping that you could recommend some cool restaurants. I generally like Arif's food takes, and I know he's a bit of a foodie, so I was hoping you can help me out and recommend some places for when I'm in town."
Well, I guess it kind of depends on like how much you're willing to put down.
Somewhere between Fogo de Chao and the Lake Street Target Eatery.
Target Eatery? Oh, I see what you mean. I was like, what?
Like, you haven't been to a Target that has a food thing. Oh yeah.
No, I was like, well, why are you recommending? But you weren't recommending. Okay, I got it. It was a range of outcomes.
Maybe I am recommending the pizza at the right. Lake Street Target. Who are you to doubt the pizza makers there?
I mean, I'm just saying, spend up for the freshie at the Quarry Target. That's all. But
we only go to Knollwood.
Okay, so if you're coming to the Twin Cities relatively soon, there's this restaurant, Heyday. It's like closing down in a month. It's my favorite restaurant. I'm so sad. I guess the owners are going to like it's not like closing down because like money or they're bad or anything like that. They're just bored and they're just going to have a different restaurant. But it's my favorite restaurant in the Twin Cities, Heyday. It's pretty expensive, but it's really delicious and a lot better than a lot of much more expensive, like pay through the nose type stuff that you'll find in the cities, which is a pretty good food city that doesn't cost that much anyway. So Heyday is fantastic. I highly recommend it. I'm going to link the So You're Coming to the Twin Cities for the Super Bowl article I wrote a while back, because it's got a lot of these recommendations too. About really good places to eat. So, Al's Breakfast, for example, obviously on there. Mickey's Diner, obviously on there. But Festival, which is the one place I don't, or right? Festival? Yeah.
Yep.
Is the one place I didn't actually put down there because I was like, if you're visiting for the Super Bowl, coming to Minneapolis for Southern food seems weird. So I'm not going to put it on the list. But if you're in the cities, it's a really good place to eat. It's one of the best restaurants in the city. So I very strongly recommend it. Although I'm not actually sponsored by Blue Door, I kind of feel obligated to bring them up. So like Blue Door, really good Blue Seas. Yeah, I don't know. There's a ton of places. I'll put a link to all the restaurants I identified. But Heyday, if you have the money,
and you'll be there within a month, then yeah.
Yeah, right, yeah.
A couple places that deserve quick mentions. The Newsroom is pretty good.
Newsroom's pretty good.
Psycho Susie's, which is something that would not have been listed in your January article.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because the patty. Yeah.
Yeah, Psycho Susie
very
is
Minnesota. Very good.
Yeah, that's an awesome place to grab a drink. That's a great awesome place to just kind of grab some food and just people watch out in the Northeast section. Most of my favorite places in Minneapolis have either closed because they are putting up like apartments, or because it turned out the owner supported the KKK. So like,
wow.
Well, I used to really like Clubhouse Jaeger until that happened. Like,
wow. I think the same thing kind of happened with one of the places that I used to love to go to brunch, and I'm not going to say it in case I have misremembered the story. I don't want to like unfairly like malign this place, but we stopped going to it because we're pretty sure it's true. Was owned by a pedophile. But it's under new ownership now. And so I feel like it doesn't have the stain of evil on it anymore. So like maybe we can go again. Probably have to double check that.
That'll require a Google.
Yeah, it's going to get some. Yeah, it's going to require research. Also, a bunch of ramen shops are opening up in the Twin Cities. I love Ramen Kazama, but there's like a bunch of them now. So that's definitely worth going for in the Twin Cities. I'm trying to figure out. Up Down is a arcade/bar that's a ton of fun. And then right next to it is a kind of hole in the wall Chinese restaurant. Not really a hole in the wall because it's like in Uptown. But like not a lot of people have heard about it or talk about it. It's called Szechuan Spice. It's not super fancy or anything like that, but it has the best mapo tofu in like the city, and mapo tofu is one of my favorite dishes. So I'll throw that out there too. Szechuan Spice.
I suppose if you're in Uptown too, you could always go to the Lotus in Uptown as well, which has just amazing food up and down the menu. Mm-hmm. Which that's always one of my stops. I can always tell when where I went to college because I'll like think about the food in Minneapolis and go, okay. JD Hoyt's Supper Club. I definitely spent a lot of time there, and then lunch over at Monte Carlo, and then I'm thinking, oh yeah, because my college was literally across the street from there. But the Monte Carlo is awesome. That is totally worth a trip over to the warehouse district. I feel like we've thrown out a lot of good names there. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that we could have potentially forgotten. We've mentioned the 112 before on the show. 112 is definitely worth checking out. If you want to drop the most money possible for a very Minnesota super fine dining, delicious experience, you could go to not fine dining, but like you could go to Manny's. Yeah, Manny's
where the Vikings always take their players.
You might as well go there as part of like a pilgrimage as a Vikings fan.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. But that place is buco expensive, way more expensive than Heyday.
Yeah, much more expensive. So delicious.
Yeah, so extraordinarily delicious.
Or after you've done all of these things and are now kind of counting your pennies, Eddington's has numerous locations across the Twin Cities, and you can just mow down on the breadsticks and have all the bottomless soup you can have, all you could ever want.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go. So that is going to be it for this episode. And here I was worried we weren't going to have enough like content, and it looks like we've gone nearly 2 hours on this.
I knew you were wrong.
Because you're from the future and you've checked.
Right.
And people stop naming their kid Carson for some reason. You're not saying why, but you are mentioning that people have stopped naming their. So that is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Arif, do you have anything to plug for us?
Yeah, I just wrote a piece on why the Vikings defense will not regress, which, super positive. Over at zonecoverage.com, I'm going to have a piece on Mackenzie Alexander soon.
And about the paywall over there, you want to talk about that again real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. So in order to read more than 3 articles a month, well, I think right now it's at 5, but at some point we may change it to 3. You need to sign up at zonecoverage.com. That subscription is free. We just need your email. We'll email you a newsletter, but there is premium content that is behind a paywall. So the stuff that Luke and I did for the draft guide, stuff that's coming up for the NBA offseason in terms of the draft and free agency, prospect reports about the MLB, like draft stuff for the Wild and stuff like that, and my training camp guide this year. All of that's going to be behind a paywall, and so you can use actually promo code Arif. That's just my name, ARIF, and get a year-long subscription for only $20. So that's like 16-17% off of the normal subscription, and that'll give you all the access to everything on the website, plus a free T-shirt in white or gray. And gift cards to My Burger and Buffalo Wild Wings.
Does the T-shirt have your face on it?
This one does not, but we will be selling T-shirts on the website that will have my face on it.
We need more Arif swag. I just, before we go off the air, I wanted to just let you know of this thing's existence. I just sent it to you here. Apparently, we're a year plus out from the XFL existing, but by God, they've got a website with merch on it.
Fantastic. That's definitely worth buying.
Yes.
Especially if the league goes belly up soon.
If it goes belly up beforehand, this is amazing. Yeah. Yep, xflshop.com, where you can get your Samsung phone case and your XFL iPhone case. $20 each.
Okay.
Yeah, you're advertising a league that is not in existence, and you will not have the same phone when the league comes out. But by God, you can get your XFL case now. Well, that is going to be it. If you've enjoyed the show, please feel free to donate to paypal.me/NorseCode or to patreon.com/NorseCode and help keep the lights on, help throw a tree fitty our way. We definitely would appreciate it. But for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening, and please continue to demand excellence. Demand Norse Code. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and co-host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/NorseCode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can also be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.